Oh, sorry. I pinged James actually, and I have confirmed with him at least yesterday that he should be able to join. Also saw that he accepted the meeting invite.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Do you know if Chris was going to join this meeting?
Sorry. He is not seeing the invite. I asked him to join. I have spoke with him. Let me ping him again and see if he can join.
Okay.
Um, I have spoke with him, but I have gathered the notes, and I spoke with him offline and just send him. All right, let's see if he can join using that. I have pinged him on Slack. I don't know if he'll be able to join. So
Okay. So, do you want to set the stage with where we were last week?
yes,
Actually,
I can.
Saad, would you mind making your screen a little bigger, zooming in a little bit? Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. So I have some other notes that I just wanted to read out from. Okay. So previously, there are two major things that we want to talk about. I don't know if we'll have a chance to talk about the second one, that's read-only handling, and one is the online-offline expansion. In the last call, we discussed that, and we kind of agreed. Not James was not there, but many of us agreed. Not we didn't have a quorum, so we could declare the a plugin's ability to like we could deprecate the volume plugin's ability to declare online offline capability. There's a PR open for that, and we could still support the offline control plane or offline volume expansion. So that was one thing that we discussed, and there's a PR that I've linked in the chat. And we discussed a bunch of other options, and I don't know if James mentioned that, like, and the other option was that don't change the wording in the CSI spec. Let Kubernetes do best effort. And the other was there's already another PR open that changes the offline wording from shall to should, because a CO, the problem is basically with, to give some background, is like when the wording currently says the CO shall not call controller expand volume if the volume is published to a node. The problem with this is that it's racy to check for if the volume is really published to a node or not. And Kubernetes, for example, cannot do a 100% foolproof check, and that's the reason it even if it did a check, it will violate the capability. But currently, we don't do online offline capability check at all in external resizer. So that's the background. So we have bunch of options, and we many of us agreed about like keeping offline supported and deprecate the plugin's ability to declare online offline capability. And if a plugin cannot support online expansion and volume is country published and control expand volume gets called, then it will return volume in use error, which is already documented. And then from there, the control plane component will check if it is in use, and it will not call until it has the CO has confirmed that the volume is not in use. So that's the conclusion so far on that I topic. Sad, can you open the PR? I mean, I don't know if you want to go and
I can stop sharing so you can go ahead and
okay.
share.
Thank you. Find the share button. Where was it? Sorry. Where did the share button go? I can't. Okay. Okay, found it.
Uh,
Sorry. It's in weird place.
So before we switch over, I just had a question. So option 3 there seemed like the option that folks were leaning towards in the last call, and there was a comment there that it technically it breaks CSI 1.x. So do we have any feeling for whether it's going to break vendor implementations? I mean, my gut tells me it probably won't, since this is kind of a broken area of the spec anyway. With
Yeah, I think
respect
the
to,
feeling is that anybody who was using this was not getting what they needed anyway, because Kubernetes didn't implement it and none of the other COs did. So from a pragmatic, practical perspective, it's broken. And so currently any driver that was saying I want offline is not getting that behavior. And by making that explicit in the spec, at least we're telling them, hey, by the way, this thing isn't doing what you think it's doing. We're removing it. Please be aware.
yeah, and I know that Nomad recently introduced support for CSI. Do we know if they're doing any of the expansion stuff?
I don't know. Does anyone know?
Yeah, I don't know either. I can check and follow up, but I don't know out of top of my head right now.
Okay.
And I really doubt that, like, yeah, they would implement, like, yeah, but I doubt, but I can never be sure. But that they check for the online offline capability where the volume plugin. So we talked about the wording because we don't want to sound like we don't support online offline at all. We still support. What changes is that a plugin can no longer. So this is the PR that the PR says deprecates volume plugins ability to declare online offline expansion capability. And ability for a plugin to declare online offline controller expansion capability via get plugin capabilities is deprecated. A plugin may support either mode of operation without having to declare them in get plugin capabilities call. If a plugin can not support controller expansion of published volume, it may return volume in use error, and CO should ensure that volume is not published before retrying with exponential backup. So that's this PR, and Zing has reviewed it a little bit. And I drop mention of online, offline most places in the spec and replace them with like for example, the volume in use error is replaced that indicates that the volume corresponding to the specified volume ID could not be expanded because it is currently published on a node. And remove the wording here, but the plugin does not have online capability. So yeah.
So I think we should, if we're going to move forward with deprecating the online offline capability, we should put a warning in the 1.3 release and then actually do the deprecation in the 1.4 release instead of pushing forward with an immediate deprecation.
Do you think you could also just check to see who's consuming this and might have integrated support for it at the CO side? And if no one has, then maybe just say it wasn't working anywhere anyway.
Yeah, but I think normally the deprecation process, you declare that you're going to deprecate first, right? Not usually don't jump to deprecation immediately. I think that's the normal process.
So here we just add a comment. We are not changing. If plugins could still set the capability actually, and it's just the RPC calls have a deprecation notice, but it doesn't show up anywhere actually.
I guess that's fair. And I guess what Chris is saying is if it doesn't work, giving a warning that this thing is going to be deprecated doesn't really help you because
it makes it sound like it will work for now.
Right. So better to reduce the amount of time to deprecation than wait longer and potentially have more drivers implement it.
And I don't know if we've discussed this more broadly, but maybe we haven't, I forgot. When we deprecate something, are we going to deprecate it with like a protobuf attribute? Because I think there's a deprecated protobuf attribute that you can tag things with.
There is. I didn't see one. Maybe, yeah. Okay. If it is there, then I'll leave.
But before we go too deep into figuring out how the deprecation is going to work, going back to the 4 options that we had, does anybody disagree with this direction? So first off, we were saying let's break offline controller and offline node into 2 separate problems. And the problem that we're talking about is offline on the controller side. And so the 4 options were, we, number 1, don't change anything on the CSI side. We do best effort on Kubernetes, but effectively we are lying to the user or to the storage plugin because the spec is very specific that this should always happen and Kubernetes is not implementing it that way. And the second is that we change the wording within the spec to say, well, it's best effort, which raises 2 questions. One is like, is that backwards compatible? And 2 is, if you're going to do that, then why have an offline capability at all if it's not really going to work all the time? And then there's the third option, which is this option, which we're saying we're just going to eliminate online offline as a capability and effectively retain the behavior of offline through use of a volume and use error code. But this does break backwards compatibility. It's the first time that we're going to be breaking backwards compatibility post CSI 1.0. So we want to make sure everybody on the call is on board with that before we proceed. And then the 4th option that was discussed on an earlier call was much more heavyweight. Let's cut a CSI 2.0 and kind of start from the beginning. And I think the general consensus on the last call was that's a very heavyweight option to proceed with. So is everybody on the call okay with number 3? Is there any objections?
I have one comment on number 3, just to bring it up again in case it hasn't been sounded before, which is if you say, hey, volume's in use, you're now dealing with a back off timer. So that means the user has to know to somehow shut down their pods that are using a pod that's using a volume, and then just hope that they get lucky with the timing so that they get retries again at some point before turning it back on.
So presumably when that error happens, Kubernetes would surface up an event to say, I can't continue with the resize because the volume is in use, please reboot. And so if the user is wondering what's happening, they'll look at their event log for their PVC, see that the resizing is stuck and they need to kick the pod, and they'll go and delete the existing pod. And when
Well,
it
they'd have
starts,
to scale it down, because if you delete the pod, right, it would be offline momentarily, but not long enough for the resize to take place.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, if it is pod is managed by stateful set
So
deployment, they
it
have
becomes a
to.
manual process now. So there's no way to really easily automate that solution.
But I thought expansion of stateful set is not supported currently, right? There is a cap that is going
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. But if
that.
user is manually expanding each PVC of the stateful set.
Okay.
Or not manually, you can automatically apply a new size to a PVC. What's now manual is the how long do I have to leave the pod off for this to occur, and then validate that it somehow succeeded before then applying it. Just creates a control object that's kind of a pain.
That's also there today without this number 3 change. If a volume does not support offline, like you have Azure disk and you try to expand it and volume was in use, it will not be expanded until you scale down your workload.
Yeah, I'm just describing the process that we're selling the idea that this changes to it's no longer supported. And you can use this volume and use response, but now the actual workflow for doing an expansion is very manual and much harder to automate. Well, not much harder, but it's annoying to automate.
But only for the plugin that support only offline.
That's true. It doesn't affect me. I'm only speaking for those that might have users of a plugin that doesn't support offline. And now they're going to tell their users to write a controller that scales down the stateful set, waits 2 minutes or some number, however long it needs to for the volume expander to work, and then turn it back on. That's just a stupid process to have to implement.
But that's not different from what it is there today, right? I don't see.
It's different based on the wording. It's not different from.
Okay.
What I'm saying is it's not a good solution. It doesn't matter if that's how it is or isn't today. It's just not a great.
You're saying that because now we're saying it's deprecated, but then they could do this. They could keep it online, and then we'll start.
No, I'm just saying that you're dealing with a retry timer that's now going to kick in before a retry. So you have to scale down your pod for a set amount of time, and then check the status of the PVC to see if it completed, and then scale it back up. It just creates an annoyance based on the fact that it's not supporting the intended action. And again, this doesn't affect me at all. I could do online.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sorry, go ahead, Hamad.
I was just saying that I agree, but at the same time, I don't see how it is different from today. Even based on
but it does raise an interesting question, which is, should we even support this as a mode if it's so difficult to actually use?
Of course, it should be supported. That's because otherwise, then we come back to, I think, the question James was asking earlier, right? Is anyone, are we breaking anyone? Then if you don't support it anymore, you're breaking a lot of people. So definitely our customers will be broken. Azure and OpenStack, right? So at least I know drivers already.
So then maybe we should put in some sort of warning somewhere. Maybe it's in the Kubernetes documentation for CSI drivers to say, hey, here's how you do controller offline. You got to return this error code, and then discuss the kind of implications of doing so, that it becomes a very manual process for the end user to actually do this. And there's, like Chris mentioned, the delicate race condition where the user needs to make sure they don't revert the size of their stateful set back before the resize is complete, which is a pretty rough place to be.
The stateful set resize cap action already takes, for various reasons, stateful set is always going to, even if it was online, it's always going to restart the pod actually, because that's the way stateful set rolls out the changes to spec. But that's a different thing.
But restarting the pod is not the problem. It's the orchestration required for the restart of the pod.
Right. It has to wait for the PVC to expand it and then restart the pods one by one.
Yeah. Anyway, I was just throwing out a concern that might come up. Maybe the
Sure.
resizer watches for the PVC object to see that it's not in use or it's not protected, and then it's, okay, great, now's my chance. At least then it wouldn't be so long, or some random timer. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
I
how
think
we would. Yeah, sorry.
Do we?
the only two options here are like we remove this as an option, which I think Xing has a fair point. There are drivers that depend on this behavior. So the best we can do is put documentation to say that here is how it's effectively going to play out, and it becomes a choice for the driver author to decide if they want it or not. For any storage vendor that doesn't like that behavior, they don't use this function.
I mean, this doesn't prevent, say, the external resizer from trying to do a best effort, right?
I mean, if we're removing the online offline capability, there is no best effort anymore. It's
Oh, is there not an error code?
there is
Yeah,
oh
something?
yes, there is an
We
error
will
code.
be doing the best effort. Even there's error code then at that point, that's what Haman's PR is going to do is if driver returns this error code, then it will not retry. It will try to make sure that it is actually offline before.
But at that
retrying.
point, it's basically a guarantee, not a best effort, right? It's if this
Uh,
error code is returned, the
but
CO
then-
will.
But the best effort, I think, it's because there's a race condition, right? I think the problem is the race condition that even if resizer tries, it may not be able to detect that it is online or offline. I think that's the problem, right?
Meaning like the first time it tries, it doesn't know, so it will always at least try once
Right.
until it gets the error code. But once it gets the error code, then it's basically never going to retry
No, it will
against that
Until
volume
it is offline,
Until-
right?
until it's offline, right?
yeah,
Right.
it will monitor the PVC. If it is offline, then it will try again. And but again, that's the second check also could be racy. Like by the
Yeah,
time
so
it
that's the
checks,
best. Yeah, so that's why it's
so
the
it's
best
still
effort.
best effort. It's not 100% ever. So
Okay, so we should make sure that's included in the wording somehow, because then we're painting ourselves into the same box again, right?
yeah,
Do you have a way to trigger a multi-attach error so that it's attached to nothing, but it's in use by that?
but sorry, like prevent the volume from being attached to another node so that it can be.
Yeah, so
handled?
use the attach detach controller to trigger a multi-attach warning to come across. When you delete the pod, you'll have caught it that it was not in use potentially. Reserve it. I mean, it's hard to do this efficiently or effective because the other pod could start up first in a race condition. But during your offline resize, your resizer would make it so the multi-attach detach controller error would show up. So the pod would get scheduled or try to get scheduled, and it would be waiting for the PVC to be available.
Yeah, we discussed that option at length actually in previous calls, and there's like various race conditions and various coordination between like the attacher and a plugin may not implement attach at all. It could just implement node publish or node state. So like it's not technically very sound to take that route actually. Just it's full of problems to do that.
Can I ask a question that maybe has already been discussed, but I forget the answer because I'm not really participating in SIG storage that much. What's the cost of doing nothing with this?
Cost of doing nothing is like currently the external resizer or the control plane component in Kubernetes that does the control expand volume. It does not checks the online offline capabilities. As a result, it continuously keeps calling controller expand volume even though the volume is published to a node. And the reason we did not add the check afterwards, even after it was mentioned to us by Xing, is if we add the check and the driver says, drivers in maybe staging environment says, see that, okay, I will not receive control expand volume if I'm published, but in production, because of all the risk condition, it receives that control expand volume call when the volume is published, and it doesn't handle this correctly. It crashes or it creates problems. Then it is even worse than than like not handling it. So that's the
But I think
cost.
that problem still exists, right, with the current proposal that we have,
No,
because it's best effort still.
no, but right now it will expect, the plugin has to expect a controller expand volume call if the, because first time it has
I
to
see,
expect.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So the wording is different. It says you should expect that this would be called and handle that gracefully. If you can't handle it, give us an error code and we'll try best effort to do the right thing. Okay.
Yeah, new wording allows and forewarns the driver authors to expect controller expand volume call. Sorry.
And what stops us from, we didn't, and I'm going to throw another option out here, and don't all hate me at once, but like what stops us from, instead of cutting 1.3, just cutting 2.0, and in the process, change this wording and slap alpha on this at the same time.
On
So
alpha.
so for example, don't tag 1.3, tag 2.0, accept the fact that we're changing the wording in a way that breaks the spec, but then also take the opportunity to tag this as alpha, so that anyone that decides to use like, the 2.0 spec is basically forced to kind of reckon with the fact that this is an alpha API and we're planning on overhauling it at some point, because I'm still not convinced that we've got all the bugs worked out of this yet. And so it seems like that way, maybe we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, right? Like we get the wording that people want. We are clearly indicating there's a breaking change because we bumped to 2.0. And we're also flagging with alpha, which indicates that, we reserve the right to break this in the future. So don't depend on this being completely stable. Is there anything like terribly wrong with that idea?
So when you say mark it as alpha, mark what as alpha? Like the online offline capability
Yeah,
or the
the entire volume expansion thing.
Okay.
Just mark everything related to it as alpha, right? And so that way we're not gutting it. We're changing the wording in a way that breaks things, but that's okay because we'll be tagging it CSI 2.0.
Yeah, the problem is that, okay, so the problems with that is like, it got it 2.0. So what are the problem? One is that the CSI, the spec took 9 to 10 months to merge, actually, to 10 months to finalize around expansion.
Okay.
And in Kubernetes, at least, the expansion is in beta for 3 years almost, I think. And we want to move both entry and CSI expansion together to GA. We could have moved just entry expansion GA sooner, but we are waiting for CSI expansion to land as well, so it'll even longer. Third one is that looking at the spec and looking at the direction, I do not think we would want to have the online offline distinction, like even in like 2.0 or in future. So it seems like that we are we are cutting 2.0, we are marking it alpha just for the sake of crossing T's and crossing I's, as say. So I do not think that we'll be reintroducing online and offline distinction in this at the later date, actually.
Okay. So I think I hear your arguments. I guess I'm not convinced that the fact that the spec took 9 to 10 months has much to do. Like, I don't know how that relates to this. The fact that something has been in beta for 3 years. I mean, I can appreciate that that's a lot of time and effort. I also think that, we want to be really careful about breaking an API that we call stable. So I think we need to weigh that pretty carefully, right?
Sure.
if it's really just a bookkeeping exercise of like renumbering something from 1.3 to 2.0 and marking it alpha, so that we can technically make a breaking change without like violating our promise. I guess I haven't heard a good argument against that.
I think there's kind of two options here, right? It's not necessarily cut a 2.0 and mark it alpha, right? We could cut a 2.0 and keep it as GA, because there's two concerns. One is around, are there issues with cutting a 2.0 at this point? It seems heavyweight, but I can't think of any good reason not to do so, because as a CSI driver vendor, whether I'm implementing a 1.3 or a 2.0, I'm going to need to do some amount of work anyway. So from a vendor perspective, it's not a huge issue. From an end user perspective, Kubernetes and these other COs are probably going to continue to support both 1.0 and or 1.x and 2.x for forever. So from an end user perspective, it doesn't matter what version is implemented, or as long as they're both supported. So then the question is around just what are we going to do with the future of resize? And if we cut a 2.0, we have an option to mark it as alpha or beta. And should we do that? I understand where you're coming from, James, because I too had the same reaction once I found out about all these issues with it and wished we'd started with an alpha. I think the drawback of calling it alpha is that it scares storage vendors from implementing it. If it's an alpha, they're going to say, okay, let's wait until at least it gets to beta, or in some cases until it gets to GA. So it limits adoption. And if we're talking about putting it in alpha, it might take it'll take 3 releases to get it to GA. And that is likely to be at least 3 quarters. So we're talking about almost a year to get this feature to GA again. And that's when folks are going to start implementing it. So I think it becomes a adoption thing, because there is a demand for the feature now.
There's also the concern that, well, if we have a 2.0, all the CEOs are going to now have to go and implement the 2.0 support, which is also going to take time. So realistically, it's going to be longer than a year.
But you don't have to, right? That's not a huge concern, because if you are a CEO or a driver author and you don't implement 2.0, you're perfectly happy on 1.0 or 1.1. That's okay, because the CEOs are going to continue to support 1.x forever.
Can we move something that was GA to alpha?
Well, can I ask a different question that's very related to that? So Saad was talking about how things are going to get pushed out, because if we call something alpha, then it's got to go through beta and then GA. But I think, does that have to do with how CSI alpha gets mapped to Kubernetes alpha or Kubernetes beta? Like how does that mapping work? Like, can you call something beta in Kubernetes even though it's alpha in CSI, or no?
I don't think there's a hard fast rule, but in general, if there's a dependency that's alpha, then we'd like to call the feature alpha, because it doesn't really make sense.
But like, I think the other way that this could play out is like Kubernetes could go GA with the 1.0 spec.
For resizing?
And then yeah, for resizing.
But that would just cause fragmentation, right? Because then if I'm a storage vendor, I'm going to look at Kubernetes and say, oh, well, Kubernetes calls resize GA and it's on a 1.1 or 1.2 or whatever. And so let me just go and implement that. And there you go. I have GA resizing. But there's no incentive to go and implement 2.0.
I guess that's the problem, right? Like, if we tie the Kubernetes resizing to a 2.0, that's realistically going to be another 2 years or so. right?
Yeah, and so I mean, what I'm saying is there may be a middle ground here where we can say let's do a 2.0, but either call it beta or GA for resizing on
The
the CSI side. And so effectively, as a CSI driver author, I can still go and all I need to do is move to 2.0, and it'll be 1 or 2 releases instead of 3 or more.
Well, even on the Kubernetes side, right? Like 2.0 support could be alpha, and it might have to go through alpha, beta, GA phases.
I see what you're saying.
Why is that? Am I missing something obvious? Like, it seems like it's like CSI is a library dependency, right? So why is bumping a library dependency require going through like alpha, beta, GA process in Kubernetes?
I think it comes down to an argument of whether this is a feature or just a implicit dependency. If it's a feature, I think generally it's required to go through alpha, beta, GA. But a argument I think can be
Because
made.
I
Go
guess
ahead,
the main
Michelle.
thing is like, because with like a new major spec, there might be a lot of changes and we might want to phase support of it through alpha, beta, GA, because drivers are not going to immediately go implement 2.0, right? So we want to make sure we have sufficient testing and coverage and adoption of drivers and all the features with 2.0 before we actually declare it as a GA thing.
Oh, sure, but the change we're talking about here is not revamping the whole spec. Like, we're talking about changing the wording for a resize feature. So it's not like we're talking about introducing CSI where everything's shuffled around and it's all new, right? Like, we're talking about a wording change to the spec that we might do just so that we don't have to break our promise of avoiding breaking APIs, right, between minor releases.
But there are like, I thought there were other items that were kind of, we decided to punt for 2.0, and if we jump to 2.0 just for this reason, then we'll want to address those as well, and that may take time. Like,
or not, or they get bumped to 3.0. Like, what's a version number, right? Like, for us, it's just indicating a breaking change, right? Or
I think what James is
I think
arguing
there's
is
still work though. It's not just bumping the version number though, right? Because we now need to support multiple major version numbers simultaneously in all the components that we have. And that might take it's non-trivial work.
okay.
I think that would be the key to deciding this is how much work would it be on the Kubernetes side to adopt a 2.0. It sounds like what Michelle's saying is there, yeah, exactly what she said, which is it could be a non-trivial amount of work. But if the answer is that we could treat it just like a minor version, then that could be an attractive option because it's cleaner.
Can we treat this as a minor version when it moves like expansion to alpha, from GA to alpha?
Well, so we're decoupling the moving to alpha. This is assuming it's keeping it in GA. Because I think moving it to alpha, we're adding multiple quarters there. So the benefit of keeping it in GA and doing a 2.0 is that, at least we're being honest per the spec.
Mhm. I think it depends on changes that go into 2.0 actually, and whether Kubernetes should be blocked from, like, or any CO should be blocked from calling expansion GA before the 2.0 lands. And
I mean,
like
the way that we would have to do it is 1.x support cannot be deprecated. And so we would have to continue to maintain it. And so what that means is Kubernetes has a CSI 1.x X resizing support, which is currently beta, and it will remain beta, and we will not move it to GA. And there will be CSI 2.0 resizing support, which I guess we can argue will start in beta and then move to GA. And then we can deprecate CSI 1.0 resizing at some point since it never made it to GA.
Yeah, it looks like at least a year of work actually.
Yeah, that does actually add a lot to the timeline. I think this is a trade-off.
I guess the other thing to actually I'm not quite sure about is like the actual mechanics that both a driver and the CO would have to do to support both 1.0 and 2.0 simultaneously.
Didn't Kubernetes already jump through that hoop once when supporting like
yeah, on the Kubernetes side, we kind of hacked it by creating just a directory with the old client in it, and then it was hacky, but it worked. We could do something similar like that on Kubernetes side, but on the driver side,
we didn't do that. We didn't do that for the sidecars though, right? The sidecars just like we had a version of sidecars that supported 0.4, and then and then the next version of the sidecars only supported 1.0, and we dropped the 0.4.
And I think that was okay because what we said was for the drivers, it was move forward, move to, when you're going to update your driver, you have to snap to the latest version or stay with where you are. So we could do something similar where we say, adopt 2.0, the sidecars are moving to 2.0, or stay where you are if you don't care. So you're not forced to change, but if you want to change, you're going to have to adopt 2.0.
I would expect drivers would probably want to support both 1.0 and 2.0, at least both major versions.
Currently,
like for minor versions, I can see drivers only supporting one, but I think for major ones, I feel like it would have to support both.
That's a good point because Kubernetes has so many versions and it takes people so long to upgrade that as a storage vendor, I'm probably going to want to support multiple Kubernetes version, not just the latest. And yeah, I think all of this hints to this is going to take a long time to do if we do a 2.0. So it becomes a question of doing the right thing, which I think is obvious, cutting a 2.0, or cheating and being more pragmatic and deprecating online offline. And I can see both sides of it.
I can see both sides of it too. I would want to make sure that we're, I just really wanted to talk it all through because it's.
I think the thing that convinces me of not being purist here is that the current implementations are broken anyway. I think we need to double check on Nomad, but the existing implementations we know of are broken. And so
so the offline expansion check, it's broken, but otherwise offline expansion works. I also had like some things like if you want to walk through the what might need changes for the offline expansion on the node, that was covered in here. Like that was one of the concerns that Chris had. He dropped off, but I spoke with him, and maybe we can.
So let's wrap up on the online side first.
All right.
Before we move to that. Or do you think it's related, or? I
think it might be like okay, how much change do we need? Is this enough to get us out of the door, or like are we going to need more changes? That's the question that we're trying to answer, right? Maybe. So it's useful. So
okay, that's fair. So let's put a pin on this, I think, before we decide on the controller side. So then move to the node side. And so the problem on the node side is that there was never a capability to set node offline online. But the weird thing was that the capability that existed on the controller side wasn't a controller capability. The online offline was a plugin capability that only applied to the controller. So super weird. But there was no way to be able to set online offline on the node side.
Yes.
There is a use case for having, I want online offline for node independent of online offline for controller. And it sounded like Chris had that use case. And the two proposals that we had last time were, one was kind of similar to what we're doing for the controller side, which is rely on the error code. And there was some weirdness around that, which caused me to push back on it. And I was suggesting something else more serious, like maybe having an explicit online offline option, or I'm not entirely sure. I kind of lost track of it, but we can start the discussion from there.
Yeah. So the option number two, that's you were talking about was like, can we call node expand before node stage, or like before node publish? Like currently node expand can only be called after node stage or after node publish. So I was talking to Chris, and I'll talk about what the problems are. So calling before node stage, it will not work for file system that require a volume to be mounted unless the expansion implicitly mounts, expands, and then unmounts the volume. And then there's if we call node expand before node stage or node publish, then drivers that don't implement controller publish volume, then it will be problematic to call node expand volume because volume is not available on the node yet. So this will force driver authors to re-implement node stage or node publish logic inside node expand volume to make the volume available on the node. But node expand volume does not take same parameters as node publish or node stage, so it will change the scope of node expand volume. And the use case that Chris had, so there's a user, he is not in the call, but what they have is that they actually don't want offline expansion, offline node expansion. Currently, they expand the volume as part of node publish RPC call, and when the driver detects that the volume requires node expansion. The reason they are doing that like this is that they do not do global mount in node stage because they need to know if volume is being used as read only. And because node stage does not have a read only flag, they do FS mount actually happens in node publish, the first FS mount. And they do some housekeeping using DEM crypt in node stage. So they don't actually mount the volume in node stage, they do the node publish. So so the reason they do is that their concern is if volume is being used as read write only once, then it is problematic to allow it to be used as read write read only many. Or if a volume is being used as read only many, then don't allow it to be used as read write once. So they enforce this by some kind of OPA policy. So if node stage had a read only flag, for example, then they could call node expand volume after node stage but before node publish, and they only support that mode. So if so to highlight this point, okay, so if they only support node expansion after node stage but not after node publish, then throw volume in use error if it is called node after node publish, then it is something that will work for them. But at node stage, after node stage, they don't know if the volume is read only or not, so they cannot support volume expansion after node stage. So that's the kind of a corner case that have, like, there's a what I'm trying to get at is the mode of doing expansion, offline expansion only on the node. By a driver could just say that, okay, I will allow expansion only after node stage, but not after node publish. So, and if node expand volume is called after node publish, it will throw volume in use error. So it becomes offline on the node. But Chris cannot use that option because after node stage, they don't know if the volume is read only. And even if node expand volume had the read only flag, because node stage does not create the global mount, it won't work for them. So having because they need to know the read only option as at node stage time. So that's the, like, in general, the offline expansion, the use case that Chris had.
So Chris, can you talk through your kind of
He,
ideal use case of like,
he,
what would be the easiest thing for you if the
he
CSI
dropped off.
spec and, oh, darn.
He
Okay.
dropped off. But I spoke with him. His easiest case will be like that. He wants read-only flag to be available in the node stage actually. Then he can do the global mounting in the node stage, and then they can support node expand like after node stage and before node publish. So it will work for them. The concern that we have in general is like, if node stage received a read-only flag, then what happens if two pods are trying to use same volume? One uses read once, one uses read only, another uses read write. That problem doesn't exist for him because he's enforcing this. If a volume is used as read only, don't read only many, then he's enforcing this via some kind of OPA policy. So it doesn't exist for him, but there is a possibility that another user or another driver has, like, yeah, on the same node a volume is published as node stage as read only, and the same volume is being staged node staged as read write. What happens then?
So, I mean, given that, doesn't the existing implementation work for him then? Or
uh,
what is the problem with the existing implementation that he's having?
he's having, because he doesn't do a global mounted node stage, he cannot call node expand volume after node stage because the volume is not mounted yet. That's the problem he's having.
I see. And so that's why he ends up doing it in the node publish.
Yeah.
And so if you made the change above, which is basically use the error codes, that would be sufficient to get what he wants?
For expansion, not really, because it doesn't help his use case. He wants, he could only expand the volume as a separate. He does not have a node expand volume call. His plugin does not implement node expand volume separate RPC call on the node actually.
Okay.
And an
So,
only case that will work for him is if node stage had read only flag. Then it will work for him. And
sorry, why does it even matter in that case? Like, why does he care whether at node stage it's read only or not?
What does that even mean?
Ben, I think Ben, your voice is cracking. So the reason
I joined. If you were.
Yeah, Chris, can you explain it? Yeah.
Chris,
Yes. Okay. Oh, Ben, you're a little garbly. So I care if it's read only in node stage because in node stage you're supposed to set up a global mount, the mount path. And when you set up that global mount path, yes, it's not the bind mount that goes into the pod or container, shall I say. However, it's still writable on disk if I don't know whether or not to set it read only or not. So something could walk the file system, could mess something up because I've now taken a volume that I'm trying to treat as read only and I'm using it as read write.
I see. It's a security issue potentially.
Yeah, data protection issue.
Okay, I could buy that argument.
Sorry, I was having audio problems. I had to
You sound much better now.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I had to restart my my headset. So you were making the case for why we should have a read-only flag on node stage?
Yeah, so the case I was making is that in node stage, we're past a global mount location, which means you're supposedly making a mount to set this up to be used by containers via the node publish. But if you don't know if it's read only, it's read write because you don't know. And technically something on the host could corrupt or make something happen to that read only at the global mount location.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you try to mount a file system, even if you mount it read-only, it will still actually write to the file system just to say, like, I'm mounting it. And in fact, there are file systems like journal file systems like ext. If they crash on some previous operation, and you're trying to like reconnect it to a new system or read only, you will actually fail to mount because you can't replay the journal because it needs write access to replay the journal. And I don't know if you can avoid a situation where you have to perform some writes from the node, even if the intended use case is that the pod will not be writing to the file system. You'll actually have to accept some mount failures if you go that way. I think it's better just to say, you know what, stage is always going to be writable, or unless the server itself is inhibiting writes by having the volume be permanently read-only at the server side.
I just think you're leaving yourself open for trouble if you have just a read-write mount that just allows anything that walks the file system to potentially compromise it.
So I just want to bring the discussion back to the expansion, because so that's the problem that Chris has, and I think it's kind of like he has rolled like node, he's expanding the file system as part of node publish call, and that works for him. And I think if we are going to take a call to whether had read only to no stage or not, that's a separate discussion. And apart from this, I think the offline expansion on the node is like in a way possible by that, like only permit the call after node stage and before node publish, and if called after node publish, it can throw volume in user. I mean, that's already worded, so it's not very too yeah.
So Hemant, the only point I was trying to make is I was saying, I agree with you that that's a separate issue, but I really don't think we need to add read-only flags to any of the existing calls.
I agree.
And we can do everything we need to do just by tweaking error codes, I believe.
Yeah. So the second section, read-only, also concludes same that even if we added read-only flag to node expand volume, it will not help. So it's like at least it will not help Chris use case. So it makes sense to not add read-only to node expand volume. And the offline case is like that if we really want to allow node expand volume to be called before node stage, then it becomes like node expand volume has to discover the device, make it available on the node, all sort of things. That is something we probably don't want to do it in node expand volume.
So one more thing, Chris, for your use case, if the volume is being attached read-only, you want the node stage to be read-only. Assuming that was possible, what would you do with a volume expansion at that point? You would just fail it?
Yeah, precise. I mean, it shouldn't be called on a read-only. I don't think it should be called on a read-only volume.
And the problem is that if you have what's being proposed here, which is a node stage without a read-only flag, meaning you don't know what's going on at node stage, and then you get a node expand after the node stage, but before the node publish, if you had implemented node stage, you would resize a volume that you believe you shouldn't resize because it was supposed to be read-only. And
I believe that in most cases, the volume has to be mounted before you can resize. And so because I don't mount it in the node stage phase, instead I just do my device mapper encryption at the node stage. I do in node publish, if it's not already mounted to the global mount, I mount it.
I see.
So because it wasn't ever mounted, I can't do a resize before publish. And so I just check to see if the device is a different size, then I just do the resize at the node publish if it also hasn't been mounted before.
You can't do a just-in-time mount?
I just don't know if I like that. Like, I don't like the idea of mount, resize, unmount. Like that's
what we do.
That just sounds like you're going to get some race condition that causes something to not do something cleanly. And
you have to have state tracking so that if you die in the middle of that, you can know where you left off and make it all idempotent and stuff. But it's doable.
Yeah.
But you have all the information you need to be able to do the mount, resize, unmount workflow if you don't already have it mounted. You should.
That's true. I do. I still think I would prefer just doing it in the publish in this scenario.
Yeah. So
Okay, so
offline.
in both of these cases, assuming we make no change to node stage, if for offline we do the error code model, this should work. All right. Effectively, what we're saying is, if you don't support online node expand, and we accidentally call it while the volume is in use, you return the volume in use error. And then Kubernetes says, okay, I'm going to hold off on calling this until after a node stage, but before the next node publish. If you don't implement a node stage, that's fine. We'll still call it before the node publish. And for Chris's use case, he'll continue not to implement this because it still won't work for him. But assuming there are other vendors who are okay doing a global mount with node stage, they could implement this and have it work. And what it would require is on the user side, they need to restart the pod. And then when the pod is restarting, the node expand should continue. But the other complication here is on the Kubernetes side, how do you track when you should call node expand before the node publish? And
That's done by in the first mount. When the first mount happens after node stage, it calls node expand, and then it calls node publish.
So if you only do it on the first, so you always do it on the first mount effectively.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is there was somebody on the last call that said you might have a storage system that does not support, that supports online only and does not support offline at all, and may, something bad might happen if it's called while it's offline.
So node stage is called after node stage. So node stage is supposed to mount the volume in the global mount.
Right,
but unless they don't use node stage.
Yeah.
So,
but then in that case, they would do what I would have to do, right? Which is what Ben recommended: is mounted, resize, unmounted.
If the plugin implements a node stage but cannot do like expansion in after node stage because it doesn't do global mounting, then they have to do what you are doing.
Okay, so effectively we're saying that if you are very, very picky and you absolutely require online, and you need to be smart enough to detect that we're calling you offline, and do Ben's hack, which is mount it, do your thing, and then unmount, or vice versa, depending on which way you're. Man, this is all super hacky.
It's not a hack, it's just very complicated.
Yeah, I think it's every storage system is kind of has a different way to be able to do this and different requirements, and trying to encapsulate that all in a single API is a pain.
And having actually done it, I'll mention to anyone who's considering that you need to think about the cleanup paths too. Like, what if you have a failed expand and then the user deletes the volume and you had mounted it? You need to figure out how you're going to clean up all that crap on the delete side or the unpublished side or whatever.
Now, one problem with the proposal, Hemant, is you're saying that you're only going to call node expand after the first mount. But if I have a pod that requires this offline behavior, I do the resize, and I get an error that says, oh, you need to restart your pod in order to get this to work. I restart my pod and it immediately gets rescheduled to the same node. Then you're stuck. The same issue that you have on the online side. You need to kind of play this dance of.
What's
that?
Like, how will it get stuck? Like,
so I have the same problem right now, right? So like in my scenario, thankfully my clusters all have a couple hundred nodes or more. If someone deletes their pod, there is the rare chance it goes back to the same node, and if it does, then it does not get resized.
Yeah.
Because it did not finish unmounting everything and tearing it down the global mount before it starts up.
Kubernetes tries to be smart about that and says, I'm not going to do the node on stage if the second pod gets scheduled quickly using it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a fair point. And it does call node publish, but if you don't permit node expand in the node publish, then yeah. So then you have a problem. Although it's like, let me double check, like if yeah, it's
And
possible
for
that
me, it's a different problem because I use the device mapper encrypt. I use DMCrypt, and it's a real pain in the ass to resize a DMCrypt device without removing it. I've tried and I've followed different guides and documentation to do so, and for some reason I can't get it to work. So I depend on rediscovering a new device by when it lands on another node. That's why then it works. If I could do DMCrypt resize, I would just do everything online. But at the same time, how do you support the online use case here? Unless I missed that.
so if it is online, then online, if you restart the device, the global mount exists, but then the kubelet detects, oh, this PVC needs expansion, and it will call it out of band, like there's a separate reconciliation loop for online expansion.
Okay.
So the two ways it calls expansion. One, it calls expansion node expand volume on the mount time, and another time it calls node expansion like when the pod is running, well, after node publish. So that's how it works for yeah. The other thing is like I'm just looking at the code actually. So we might have to see, okay, if the device is already mounted, then the mount device routine will yeah.
I wish you would just do no. Sorry for moving into the weeds here,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's a read write once volume, I don't know why you wouldn't call node unstage volume before starting the new node stage volume if it's the same, if it's a new pod coming in.
We could, but it's just it's like it's I think it's not impossible to fix it, but it's basically a race kind of thing. Like if the new pod lands that uses the same volume before the previous device
Well,
is
I don't
running
want you to
on.
call node unstage somehow in the wrong order because that fucks things up. But if you could block and call node unstage before you then call node stage again, I think that would be a cleaner implementation for read write once volumes. If we are still, and I don't know if Kubernetes still treats it this way, you know, there was this variable of read write once, and Kubernetes meant the same node is fine, many pods. I don't know if that's still the case, but in the CSI spec, I thought it wasn't the case. It was single user, so single pod only. And I don't know if Kubernetes implementation follows those guidelines.
We still have spec issue or spec non-compliance issues there in Kubernetes.
I wish it would be read write once, single use, and just call it a day. Especially since I use SE Linux and it's a real pain in the ass.
All right, so I think the users of like a true offline, like in the sense like if we supported, like if a volume driver did not implement node stage and just anything calling before node publish is, and if or node stage is just yeah, then it means that the node expand has to do device discovery and all the sort of thing and make the call somewhat uglier, I think. So we are over time. Do you have a call next week? I don't know when is the next CSI community sync.
What are we hung up on at this point?
I think we need to decide on the two options for the controller side. Are we going to do a 2.0 or are we going to do the 1.3 deprecation? It sounds like most people are leaning towards 1.3 deprecation still, but we need to decide with James in the room. And on the offline side, I don't know if there's any good options, honestly. It sounds like we're going to try to do the error code thing, and it'll work for some people. For people like Chris, who it doesn't work for, you'll have to hack around it. I would venture to say even like if we need to drop offline on the, maybe that's an option on the node side. Like if we're going to add wording around this and it's not going to work for the only use case that we know, which is Chris's, should we even add that wording there?
Why does node public? I'm sorry, maybe I'm lost you, but is it the only reason that it can't happen after node publish is because you don't know if something's using it yet? But
I mean, it'll happen after node publish anyway. That's the default case, right? It's the default case is anytime there's you detect that you need to do a node expand, it'll go ahead and do it immediately. It may be, I mean, most likely the workload is already in use at that point.
I guess I'm getting at is why wouldn't you just make the flow? So let's say you have node stage, then node publish, then node volume expand. For offline, node publish then expand could happen as when node publish is only called at startup anyway. So at the same flow, you could just add it then.
Or you mean the call node expand after node stage, but after node publish, but not before.
Yeah, after, but before the pod starts is the key for offline, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But I don't know, like maybe there's some use cases where the volume can't be mounted anywhere and they need to do it, and then they would break for those users.
But then they could do the Ben hack, unmounted.
Well, then they have to rerun the. That's even worse. That's the inverse. Like node publish already succeeded. Now I got to remove node publish, resize the volume, and then rerun the node publish.
I don't think he has to do that if you call after node publish. It's only after node stage it's called, and like I don't know.
No, I mean that there's a reverse hack. Like for someone that they can't have it mounted for some reason when they do the.
Oh, well, if they can't have it mounted, they'll just fail during the regular expand that gets called immediately, and then Kubelet will wait until the next time it starts up a new pod and then try it at that time.
Well, that's what I'm saying is if it happens after node publish instead in the new pod, it would have already been published. Then you'd have to unpublish
Chris is proposing a kind of new flow, which is forget everything that we have, just fix node expand to always be called after node publish.
To be called before node publish.
I like the idea of having a very predictable order of operations, because if at the very least you have that to depend on, you can always like build in hacks to work around it. I think the worst thing is when it's not predictable. It might be called after node stage. It might be called after node publish. Good luck.
I mean,
pretty rough.
Yeah, I think we could do that actually. We can just always call node expand after node publish. I don't know if there are volume plugins that depend on being called after node stage, like that support. Like for example, a plugin that says like a plugin could theoretically just say that okay, the way I will implement offline is I will support after node stage but not after node publish. And in that case, the node expand volume, even if it gets called after node published, will fail. And
the ones that must do it offline can never succeed after node publish, because after node publish you're online.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think what Chris was saying is that after node publish, you're technically not online until the pod starts. And
but then
Kubelet has a way to stop the pod from starting, but call node expand until basically block on
running the pod.
Okay, so maybe online offline is the wrong word. If there was a plugin that required it to be unmounted at the time, then that doesn't work because publish requires it to be mounted.
Right, unless you then go and unmount and remount as part of your.
But you can't because someone's using it in theory.
Yeah, that there's another problem. So if you call only after node publish and you call it offline, you cannot call it offline because the other reconciliation loop that exists for node expand for expansion on the kubelet will call node expand volume like asynchronously from the whole mounting thing.
But it's safe to say that node stage is the same as online also, if you respect global mount.
But you have the distinction, like okay, node stage has been called, and you know that this node publish is not yet called. So you know the volume stays that it is
No,
not
The
published yet.
wording of the spec makes it clear that you don't have to put a mount in that global mount.
But what if you like that flow?
Well,
And so now,
you can do what you want, but the spec will never, the CO is not allowed to assume that you've mounted anything after node stage, whereas it is allowed to assume that it has a valid mount after node publish.
I'm just
So-
saying that node expand breaks that flow if you did use the global mount, and now node expand is called after node stage. Now you can't mount it in node stage.
But that's an SP implementer's choice. Like the spec says, you know, this is valid. I'm saying that it's possible to write an SP that has
Yeah.
these limitations and works around them while also conforming to the spec.
That's true. I mean, like I do, I don't mount it in the node stage.
Yeah, so the one major like concern I have is like if the like major or like concern is like always node publishes, it will be always, then it will be like it will not make anyone happy who wants to truly implement offline expansion on the node, because it will, the other reconciliation loop will keep calling node expand volume after node publish anyway, and then the driver will not be able to distinguish between the first mount and the first mount and then node expand volume called and this other reconciliation, like resize reconciliation that happens in the kubelet. You cannot distinguish between, oh, the pod is starting and node publish is called and node expand is called, and second one is like node expand is called out of band because the pod is running and user has decided to expand the volume.
Okay, so it sounds like we need another call to close on this, and we're not going to finish. So maybe let's sync up offline to find a time that works for everyone and schedule a call for sometime next week. Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific works for me.
For James, he said after 2 p.m. is better for
After
him.
2 p.m. That's after 11 Pacific, so I think that should work for him too then.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
What time?
11 a.m. Pacific, Tuesday, the 19th.
It's not great for me. I have
Okay.
2 meetings that conflict with that.
Okay, no worries. How about Wednesday, 11 a.m.?
For me,
We have a conflicting object bucket kept meeting.
That's been moved. That's
Oh.
on Thursdays now.
Oh, okay. Well, then my calendar's wrong. So take that slot.
Okay. All right. We'll put it at 11 a.m. Wednesday, the 20th. All right. Sorry this is taking so long. It's hard, but we're getting there. We'll converge on an answer.
and I'll throw it out there that for myself, I don't really care what we choose. Like the current flow works for me. It's not the way it's supposed to be, but
Yeah. We also want to make sure that whatever we come up with doesn't end up breaking your current flow.
no, because I just returned true. I just returned done for node expand volume.
Cool.
So wherever you call it, you'll get the same answer.
All right.
All right, cool. So I'll schedule one for 11 a.m. on Wednesday. I'll see you all next week. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Yep.